Frenzy Podcast.
Hey, how's it going, my friends? This is Nick from the Nerd Frenzy Podcast. Guys, Andrew Walter Mallory George right next to me right now.
Real life in one same space-time continuum.
Oh,
how are you, buddy?
I'm very good, my friend. How are you doing?
Doing very well, very well. Coming to you live from the basement, the studio, the Nerve Center.
Yeah, that's right.
Your Bat Cave.
Absolutely.
You know, these are all the trophies from your previous cases solved. It's fantastic to see them live.
Oh, I think of it like in Predator 2, whenever he kills a predator, and that movie is where you see the actual alien and the human skull, and you're like, oh, cool, trophies. These are mine.
So you killed 2 baby Yodas.
2 baby Yodas.
You're a monster.
And I killed to get this beautiful cup that Pyro made for me.
Oh,
William Hammer.
It is beautiful. Fine craftsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So, my friend, we actually are talking about Suicide Squad today.
The Suicide Squad.
I did
most
that
annoying
earlier.
distinction.
I did that before, and there is a difference. And one, even though I hear actually that there is a director's cut that is way better, by the way, of Suicide Squad, but we still got to see the Suicide Squad from James Gunn, and it was a lot better than Suicide Squad.
Well, absolutely, and it's a very bizarre, unique movie to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna get into that. There's just a lot of fun to be had in this movie. A lot of movies these days, especially with the debates of the different tones of DC and Marvel movies, this stands out in a really nice way. It's the first time in a while I've seen a movie I feel made for an adult audience that really kept it adult and didn't patented anything and wasn't diluted in any way. So
and it's funny, it's a movie that the whole time they're being extremely goofy and they're doing what sometimes you don't do in movies, but they're able to get away with it because they're also throwing a lot of character development, and it's just beautiful storytelling through a very silly movie, and they're able to get away with a lot of things because of it.
Yeah. It's also amazing that there's 2 movies with the word suicide right in the title in this day and age, and they got away with that somehow. So, anywho.
Well, when was it where we started doing this anti-hero thing? And first of all, I'm curious on psychologically, why is it that we are rooting for the villain in a kind of weird way too?
Because there are bigger villains. And this is where this movie is definitely where it breaks from the comic mold of there's no good guys. They horse relish in that. They beat that over your head that they're not good people and they're the bad guys, much like the first one did, verbally often. But what the twist in terms of the movies, the multiple motivations of each character, that no one is necessarily here or there and has different reasons for what they've done, is what makes it kind of like this nice casserole of characters in the movie, because no one really is truly good or evil. And in this one, you have obviously a larger evil or larger big bad guy, literally larger than everything in the end.
Yes.
Which just kind of makes all that drift nicely narratively to kind of stick that landing like they do.
Well, and it's funny, you say the larger, and you're talking about, what's his name, Starro?
Starro the Conqueror.
Which is funny because on comic, it works just fine because it's comic. But typically, if you said, hey, we're going to use this guy as the villain, they're like, no, you're not, because a big old...
It's a giant starfish.
I mean, and at the end of the day...
The bad guy at the end is a giant walking starfish.
Yes, very corny, but guess what? You have James Gunn, who did Guardians of the Galaxy. It's Slither, and what's the one with Elliot Page?
Oh, Super.
All these movies...
That one is messed up.
Yes, and it's kind of a perfect example, almost like a little hey, this is what Suicide Squad could kind of be. And it was the same kind of, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it was in your face. I mean... People the heroes were getting shot in the head. And,
very blunt.
Yes, it's very blunt. And you thinking Rainn Wilson, oh, this is a guy from The Office, so, how bad can it be? But it's very intense, and Suicide Squad is the same way, but luckily, at least Suicide Squad, it's so, almost like Robert Rodriguez-ly done that it's okay, I'm being artistic, and also here's some beautiful performances, too.
Yes, I guess that's probably the first thing, if you wanted to start there, of tone of this movie, is, if I could give it a word, it'd be zany. There's a levity to it. It is hyper violent, but the violence is also very choreographed and almost cartoonishly brutal. Some of the most crunchiest of animes you might see. Which when you get through that, you realize, oh, you know how you watch anime fights, you're like, oh, because they really lay it on thick. It's like this. It's almost like a performance art film. in a lot of ways.
Yes,
Especially when you get to Margot Robbie and some of the beautiful things she does. Whether you've heard the rumor that the lock-picking scene was all legit, right? That she really did that stunt?
I've heard that she did pretty much all of her stunts, right?
Oh, no, but she was literally able to pick the lock with her feet upside down. That's all her. That woman's amazing.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure she gets fan mail every day, and the one's out there for her. You know, stay positive, Margot. You'll find that right guy someday. There's plenty of nice guys out there.
One thing that was really odd about her, I guess, when they started doing the whole love thing, where she started falling in love with a guy and stuff, I remember telling myself, "Hey, I'm a huge fan of this movie so far, but I don't like where this is going," and I really didn't. I didn't want. Oh, he's such a nice guy and all this kind of stuff. And then she kills him, and I go, "Oh, thank God!" Because I remember, and it literally did. It completely just did a 180 on everything. Say, "Hey, you thought that we were going to do that thing that they do sometimes that's really annoying because it kind of just takes away from the steam of the rest of the movie." It's like, whoa, you guys what are you doing? But we're not going to do that.
No.
It's like, oh no, the Joe, I said I would never do that again. And he's like, this guy just, I was like, oh, he's dying.
Yeah. Oh. Well, let's talk about one of the better parts of this movie and the improvements for, the wonderful Miss Robbie is that the Harley Quinn character has been really revamped to be more, I think more to her true self, because this is like a living Bugs Bunny type of character. That's Amanda Clown as well, and she's completely of her own power. Versus the first one, she is my big problem with the Jared Leto Margot Robbie thing of the first one. It's so hypersexual and so natural born killers, like gross. And I think the beauty of the Harley Joker relationship that makes Harley the tragic figure was always that I don't think it was ever about sex, and she was just in love with him, and he always treated her like crap, right?
Well, yeah, because I mean, whoever knows the story, she was the person who was trying to find out in Arkham Asylum what
Yeah.
And then she ended up being intrigued by him, and then all of a sudden oh my gosh,
yeah,
Mr. J.
And then since the Suicide Squad and the very excellent Birds of Prey movie, which I hope you've seen, where it goes into that further.
I didn't think it was excellent.
Well, in terms of getting her character to here, where she finally just is like
excellent.
a badass.
I thought she was excellent. I think that there were other roles in that I don't know. I think they were a little, hyper realistic. I guess
they just need to give that movie more money. It looked too much like an indie movie, but that's a conversation for a different day.
I don't know. I don't know if that's a problem to have an indie kind of style movie, is it? Maybe for that it is.
Well, that's a good point, because I would say the problem that you probably find with both the first Suicide Squad and this is they're too gritty in real life for the fact that we have comic book characters in these movies, right? David Ayer had done all these very gritty South LA, crime dramas.
Which I like those, yeah.
And that's that tone, which is a very different film, but you're putting a Crocodile Man in here, and we're putting all sorts of this clown woman in there. I think that was the fault of the first one, which is what DC probably scrambled to figure out, is they wanted this James Gunn tone.
Yep.
And they infamously edited it all, and David Ayer's come out and said they wanted to be more like Deadpool. And I would say, yeah, Deadpool and the James Gunn is just like a kind of two types of Oreos on the shelf. They're the same cookie, but they're different, a little bit of flavor. But James Gunn's a little bit more masterful at it. He's not. This one, I think a lot of people like it so much because there is so much to like in one movie that it has a lot of repeat value. You have a lot of characters you can go back and look at a little deeper. I guess let's start with that. What were some of your favorite characters that actually either you were looking forward to or kind of came out of the mix?
No, absolutely. And there are many. I would say the ones that stood out the most, obvious ones, I have a huge crush on Idris Elba. So, I mean, anything he's in, and I think finally, because the Fast and Furious franchise, the Star Trek 3, it seems like they haven't really given him anything like of substance as a main lead. And I've been wanting him to play James Bond for, 12 years now. But
well, this could be his James Bond, because it's essentially just a real badass G.I. Joe version of a James Bond.
Yeah.
You've heard infamously that this was supposed to be Will Smith's Deadpool character come back. They didn't necessarily want him to not be Deadpool again. They didn't want to recast it completely, so they just... I think that was my problem with Bloodsport as a character. It was not far enough away from Deadshot to really make him seem that much cooler. It's not the fact that it's like you just got another black guy to play another black character. But all the different ways you could have made this character unique from each other, they really just copied and pasted. And that was a little bit of a bummer.
I felt like, funny enough, and Will Smith, he's excellent. But I felt like when I watched his version, I don't know. I felt like, funny enough, out of the underwhelming performances, he was one of them. Mm-hmm. I thought if you want to talk about always bringing her A game, I forget the actor's name, but Amanda Waller.
Viola Davis.
Yeah, Viola Davis. I mean, everything she is in, she kills. She always kills every movie. I remember watching The Help. I was watching The Help the other day, and I'm just watching her, and I mean, everyone's so good in that movie. It's hard, but every single time I've ever seen her in any movie, Fences with Denzel Washington, even and like when you take away from him,
she's a professional shouter. She's so Fences, the fight in Fences where she's just shouting in Denzel's face, and in this one where she's shouting straight into the screen, just like that's your power there.
Stand down!
Oh my god! I think she spits in the camera, and it's visceral. Yeah. That's a very good part of the film.
Try to catch it.
Well, I had to watch this film at my parents' house where there was always something in the background, so I had to do a lot of subtitles.
Oh, okay.
But also the subtitles made it real fun because the sound effects for some of the more violent parts of it were things like squench and squelch and splurt and splat. I'm like, oh, this movie just sounds violent. But also that kind of enhanced the actual comic bookiness of it to me, right? It was like having those sound effects like you have on the page. Because it's definitely that scene when they raid the camp, and it's just
oh my gosh! You just find out what they just did.
Yeah, that's a great twist. But the cartoonish gore and just the relishing of that scene.
Oh, they're all just sitting there like, watch this. This is gonna be cooler than yours. And I'm like, and then you find out that all these like kills that meant nothing to them were actually people that were on their side technically. Yeah. And then they're like, hey, where are all my people? Like they should have alerted me. And they're like, oh.
And so that's played for comedy, but that also strengthens the whole thing of like the anti-heroes can still be good guys because we're shifting the tone in a way we're not really thinking about how real fucked up that really is.
Oh yeah, seriously. But
you go into it knowing everyone's gonna die. That's kind of the Looney Tunes cartoonish score of the film, even though it's very grounded. Yeah. Is that you can just kind of know? I mean, I think that purposeful intro with that big twist where the whole first team dies was deliberately to set the stage for it's going to just be weird. You're not don't like any character. This is almost like, it's going to be staged horror for the horror phobes.
Your expectations might be subverted every once in a while.
Yes.
And it is true. There are people, and so Idris Elba, even though he was great, he was not the best performance. Now him and John Cena, John Cena, by the way, this is easily his best acting I've seen him do. And it is funny how it has to be this over the top performance, but oddly enough, everything was still subdued to the point where I was like, oh, you're kind of the only one here that is not believable. He was maybe one of the best parts of the whole thing, and I love how his character was flawed, and he had he was a good guy, but he was not a good guy. He had certain principles that he stood by, but a lot of them obviously were not good principles. But in his mind, he's like, well, they're my principles.
Absolutely, and that's where I think James Gunn's writing really shines because that's a real fun parable psychosis to play on. Like that character's from the comics straight up. That's his origin and that's his thing. But to take that to the nth degree and really play it out to that real kind of a real world mental disorder where he can't. It's a compulsion, right? He will not go against these values of his, but he can justify things, and that's actually bigger. Yeah. And then going back to the big reveal that the U.S. government is by things. It goes back to that whole, evil is subjective. You can rationalize anything for the right cause, can't you?
Sure, he was doing it for America, but what was going on was not American. And it was, I mean, who knows? There's probably been a lot of.
When you say I would say one of my favorite characters of the films was Colonel Rick Flagg.
Which is way better. I mean, he was good in the first one too. But like I said, most people in the first one, even good actors, they didn't really shine well. But.
He's essentially the Star-Lord of this movie because even down to the cartoon graphic shirt, I was a little disappointed in that. It was potentially comics accurate because Rick Flagg always wore bright yellow, but then they had to do whatever the hell that graphic is, and that's just a throwaway there. But he doesn't really have a lot to say in this movie, but he has a lot to do, which is interesting. Like it's a lot more of him being badass on par with Idris and Cena. Like the whole scene in the truck where it's the three of them breaking out is just a really cool like group action sequence, right? Because everybody's just doing their really cool shit. Everybody's doing amazing things at this movie, but he's also by the end the only good guy, and you see what happens to him.
Yeah, well, and it's the moment he realizes that Amanda Waller just is like, oh no, I'm hiding a big secret that it blames America for all this going on, and he's like, hey, I was a soldier and I did not join for this kind of bullshit. And then the moment Peacemaker saw that, he's like, hey man, I can't let you go. Yeah. And that's whenever the fight meant something because I mean, I was
between ideologies.
when you see the guy, the all American guy who goes, "Hey, you know what? This is not right, and I'm here to fix the wrongs," and then all of a sudden he dies.
Yeah. So was Peacemaker a traitor, or was he just efficient?
Well, he is efficient no matter what you say, but he is a traitor because he's betraying his own family right there, right?
Yeah. And he seemed to be the nicest one when he wanted to be the nicest one. So, like, that whole bar scene is pretty fun.
Yeah. The whole scene when he's in his underwear is surprisingly hilarious, even though it's like you're thinking, okay, you guys are doing that joke, which that joke should have been erased from cinema, but yet it still works somehow. It's and like I said, it was part of the charm of John Cena seems like a charming person anyways, but you still see that sense. Even Bumblebee, when I remember watching that. And I like Bumblebee. He, even though I loved seeing him in the movie because I like him, I could see the acting. I could see it. And I could see it almost every time I see him. But this is the one time I'm like, hey man, you are top 3. But I will say, oddly enough, my two favorite characters, Ratcatcher 2 and Polka Dot Man.
Well, absolutely. Those are the, first off, the oddest balls of the two.
Yeah.
The most visually fun of all of them. Polka Dot Man is the way he's played and the way, the whole concept of him is very James Gunn, which is, like, he's the Rocket Raccoon of this movie, right? He's just such an oddity with such a layered sadness that comes out through. Then, of course, by the end, it's not. One of my problems was I did not like the whole imaging of the mother on things joke. I thought that got a little too. Like, whenever he saw his mother on thing, because they made the woman who was his mother,
poor thing.
once again, just such a caricature versus like a real person. It'd be almost kind of funny if they hadn't shown it, but you just kind of saw his perspective of it. But
or maybe just saw it a little bit. Well, because it was kind of disturbing. I mean, I guess she was an evil woman because
but it goes back to like there's gags in this movie for as serious it is and violence it is. They like go out of their way to do gags. Sometimes.
But they're like rated R gags.
Yes,
and they're intense. Yeah, but ultimately there's something about this movie that I was, first of all, to be entertained the whole time, and then to laugh out loud a decent majority of the time, and then to also get a stomach ache whenever I felt like there might be some harm that comes to these characters.
Exactly. And as you hit on Ratcatcher 2 as a character, they did a great job showing that she was very different for her motivations, and then it's amazing how many backstories you can fit in and how little it takes to really make all that work. They were so good about just explaining the torment of her father's addiction, plus the love that was unconditional toward her, which just explained her to the point where she wasn't, she was just such a deeper character and such a more approachable character after you kind of figure that out. The rest of them, of course, just are so hard-nosed and so weird.
The other ones are like the obvious, and I guess I don't know how you describe it, but every single character has their little like time to shine and like they're fun. But then there's certain characters that actually do. Like I really did feel bad for Polka Dot Man. I felt like whenever, because when you see in the trailer, you're saying like, oh, we're all gonna die, and he goes, you're like, can we, or we are, and you're like ha ha ha. But then when you watch it, you're like, oh no, you're saying that because you're a very depressed, sad person.
Well, and then he ends up being the kind of the bleeding heart of the film because he cares about Milton more than anybody else.
I know who.
Yeah, and once again, this movie's got jokes and gags, but that one is just great. That's a great banter. That's a great. But also it explains. Also, that Milton is in that like a slow shot of them all walking through the fog.
Well, first of all, it's so funny. I've watched the movie twice now, and when you watch it the second time, he's with him the whole time.
Absolutely.
And and it's funny. I remember there was like maybe one scene I remember saying, "Who's that guy?" And then I forgot all about it. And then you watch it again, you're like, he's literally with him the whole time until he dies. And then so when they were talking about like Milton, I'm like, well, was he in the movie? And then you watch it, he was.
I used to wonder what they were talking about. Become such buddies, right? They must just been in the background hanging out.
I mean, but everyone's like, "Oh, he's such a nice guy," and it's funny because like you see him like, and usually they hide him kind of well, or when you do see him, it's like, "Oh, he's just another guy." They'll eventually tell me who this guy is, but then he dies, and then they're like, "Oh, he's dead." And, okay.
How did you feel about King Shark? And did you think he was too Groot-like?
First of all, they were doing Groot. I mean, 100%. I mean, they even had a guy who has a very deep, like almost.
You know who that guy is? It's Sylvester Stallone.
I know. That's
And I'm
awesome.
sure he got a fat check for doing those grunts and groans.
Well, he better, because I know he probably got a fat check from being in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 for 45 seconds.
I think that's a little bit of a name drop. They just want to put Sylvester Stallone in the credits.
And why not? I mean, and that's one of those things, too. Even though he's playing, and it is a surprise, too. He is playing a character that is, I mean, he's an idiot. I mean, he's a shark. But the cool, it's Sylvester Stallone. I mean, and regardless of how you feel about Sylvester Stallone, he is an Oscar winner.
Yeah.
And he's now playing, oh, it's fish.
Yeah, well, and also going back to this like weird world this movie takes place in, nobody really explains this giant shark person, and is everybody like too confused that the giant shark person exists?
No,
Like,
no, they're cool with him. I mean, they're calling him by his real name too, his Hawaiian name.
yeah, he has a real name.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell?
Yeah, they never call him, hey, shark, man. They just like, hey, what's, I forget his name, but, and he comes from some kind of,
Well, I can tell you a little bit of origin, but the name is Nanawe.
Danawe.
And I guarantee you we're going to have some babies named Nanawe here in the next couple of years.
Oh.
In 21 years, I'm going to see a Nanawe on a license, driver's license at a bar somewhere.
Yeah.
Is that a boy or girl's name? Nanawe.
I mean, the thing is about anything Hawaiian or Samoan or anything, it's all beautiful. I'm sure it could be anything.
Well, the name comes from, obviously it's Hawaiian, sounds Hawaiian, it is Hawaiian, because King Shark came out around in the Superboy comic, which was part of the fallout of the death of Superman. You remember they split the four Superman, they all got their own series. So he started off as a Superboy villain, and at the time, Superboy operated in Hawaii, which is pretty sweet.
Is that when Doomsday killed him?
Yes. So then we're talking like late 90s stuff.
Yes.
But
That
so
was,
if you want
that
to talk
was
about
good, by the way.
So if you want to talk about the deep pulls of the DC lore that James Gunn went to with these characters, he didn't pick or choose anything necessarily from a certain era, which some directors do. Some people only want to do the Silver Age, 'cause that's what they like the most. Polka Dot Man is Silver Age. Of course, the whole concept is Silver Age. But then he also goes into some of the more modern comics to grab some weird guys like the Javelin is modern. Mongal has a whole different thing. The fact that she just kind of shows up and hands out.
Her dad's actually pretty important, too.
Oh, but who cares? Why should he die anyway? Weasel, like just the idea that he can play with whoever he wants in the entire DC lore. He's obviously a fan. He's obviously well read because he's done some deep cuts. Peacemaker himself. It's a very deep cut, and that's where James Gunn always succeeds in taking just really obscure characters that have like one really good gag or one really good tick, and then expanding on it in a way that makes them a little bit more film friendly, right?
Yeah.
Star-Lord's a really good example of that, where that was a real one note, basically like space cop character, and in his hands it turned into a very like lovable anti-hero. So
Oh man, and speaking of, there's been a certain thing. James Gunn, Taika Waititi, which of course he played Ratcatcher.
and I would say the two of them.
Yeah, absolutely. They have to be, right? Because they have. First of all, you can tell there's a very 80s aesthetic going on. It's obviously like retro-ish, but it's also very like futuristic too. And obviously Loki is now taking the same kind of notes from it. They're all kind of following this whole idea that it sounds like it's pretty much set in the style by James Gunn.
Yeah, I would say that James Gunn and Taika Waititi. Oh, I'm going to totally butcher that name.
Taika Waititi, yeah.
I'm prepping too. Taika Waititi. Gonna title Wakiki. Baby, you and me.
I like it.
Yes. They definitely have this. They're striking the future of Marvel, and I want to say they're probably going to make the movies more like this, and then the shows more. I guess. Well,
More friendly.
yeah, it all depends on how cosmic the DC or Marvel, whichever one we're doing. The more cosmic Marvel gets, the kind of like the more in unison it becomes, right? I actually would say like WandaVision and Winter Soldier and all those, when you spike out into different genres of different characters away from the cosmic, you have a lot more fun. But I think we'll see what the Sam Raimi Doctor Strange movie does, and whether or not they kind of edit him to be more like those two guys, or vice versa in the future. What if Sam Raimi is the future of the Marvel universe?
I mean, it makes sense because he's kind of the person who started it all. I mean, in a lot of ways.
That's fucking true. He's the grandfather.
Yeah. I mean, of course, there are people that did Blade and X-Men, of course, but the whole kind of it's hard to explain because Spider-Man is a different quality than those other two, and I would say even better. I think Blade's the most important. I think people and funny thing about Blade is people don't even realize that Blade was kind of the thing saying, hey, guess what? We can have a mature version. and I think it was like the first of its kind.
Absolutely. Imagine, yeah. Especially like this movie was a lot too blatant, all of those, because it's the audiences have been so inundated now by all these different tones, all the different ways that these stories have been told. And if you give some, like you said, I think the real big asset here in this movie is all the subversion and all of the twists on the expectations. But you had to have those tropes in the first place in order for that to work. And so it really comes on the heels of a lot of really, I guess I don't know what I want to say there. We can scratch this. I wanted to talk more about the starfish.
You talking about slang for butthole, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about how they did take a very interesting Silver Age character and made him disgusting. The texture and the wetness and like the breathing of like the weirdness of Starro, and then the fact that one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in a goddamn movie is Harley Quinn swimming inside of his eyeball.
The way
and then they try to make it all like
the way she
a spiritual moment.
In there, I'm thinking, well, first of all, do you have the spear of destiny? Like it went through it like it was meant to go through it. And I thought, and maybe I guess eye is actually, because technically our eye is actually open, isn't it? There's actually a big old hole in it that we don't even realize.
There's a layer, there's a protective layer, and then it is all a bunch of goopiness in there.
I think that's what they were trying to say, because it's just very thin. And so I think that's probably why, because it looked like it's like when she went through it, almost like she went in a swimming pool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, then of course it's the culmination of the movie-long joke about the whole damn javelin and the fact that the javelin had to be something. Well, that's what's really good at. Everything comes full circle, right? You got the javelin being used for its purpose. You have Sebastian the Rat warming up to Bloodshot, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. You have the staff, Amanda Waller's staff, turning around and like coming into their own. They're all going to be murdered, right? Because you remember Suicide Squad 1, she shot people just for existing and like seeing her leave the building. They're not coming in Monday. They're all executed.
I know, and it's crazy because that girl who hit Amanda over the back of the head.
But you talk about visceral. I mean,
she's going to be dead soon. I mean, I know when you think about it, at first you're like, oh yeah, good for you for standing up to her, but then you realize, okay, that's just not some lady that's like, hey, that's my boss. No, that's Amanda Waller. She's evil. Mm-hmm. Like a prime example of what just happened in this movie. The biggest villain is not the Thinker. No, it's Amanda Waller, and what she's hiding, and she's hiding the truth. And what's more important? The most important thing in people in the world is the truth. I mean, it's and like I said, Viola Davis is awesome, but.
Well, you mentioned the Thinker, and Peter Capaldi as the Thinker is something else.
I know, he's great.
They made him look disgusting, which I thought was a nice little effect.
Yeah. I wonder how they did. Did he wear like a green screen over his head, or did he shave his head?
I'm sure he got to wear some sort of fantastic prosthetic.
Okay.
And walk around with that silliness going on. But going back to like who's the real villain of this movie, they really try to have almost four, but the two generals of Corto Maltese aren't even characters, right? They're really just props. The Thinker is only in there for a couple of minutes, but he has a really good couple of minutes, which is why you hire Peter Capaldi, because he's a guy who can just want him to talk.
What a great way of doing it, and I, that's the last good Doctor Who we've got, I guess.
Yeah, for now, he was one of my favorites, but the thing with him is he can be. I would have liked more of the Thinker not being just so crotchety, right? Like. That could have been another character to like layer up a little bit.
What's his comic? I don't really know his origin as well as you would.
He's kind of a fun one because he's been all over the place. He started off as a Golden Age villain, I believe, of the first Flash, and he was just super smart. That was his power. But then later years, they turned him into more of a computer, like a living computer virus program, because like the original guy downloaded himself, and so he was like this AI menace.
Oh, that's cool.
So they've always kind of done some interesting things with him, but this is kind of just a real basic mad scientist. It could have been any mad scientist character from DC lore, and they called this one the Thinker for some reason. But
did you find that insulting, or did you actually like it?
Oh, knowing that he's only you knew he was gonna die the minute you saw him. But
he's not gonna go, hey, I decided to be a family man. Yeah, he's like, yeah.
It goes back to the fact that there's so many characters in DC's like back catalog that if you really want to just go find one to like name drop or plug, which is like essentially that whole first team was just a bunch of random name drops. Do it, like, and he's really found some of the weirder ones DC has.
Yeah.
I would say DC has, like in its like classified files, some of the weirdest fucking characters in the world.
Yeah.
Marvel likes to think they have some weird ones. No, DC went hog wild in the 70s. Created some really weird things.
And when was because DC like Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman, that all started in the late 30s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
depending.
And obviously most of Marvel stuff started in the early '60s.
Yes.
So when did like how, first of all, how do they reflect off each other, and second of all, like how did like DC already had so many years, like what was, I mean, what you said they doing wacky stuff in the '70s.
Mm-hmm.
Were they doing very generic things like in the '30s and '40s, and then?
No, you have to just remember what a different time they were, right? So when you create a character for Batman, and Batman's a family-friendly comic for 10 cents on the stands, you get villains like Polka Dot Man. Because it's just wacky. You've seen all those Batman memes where he's wearing rainbow-colored shirts, or like, Robin didn't wear full pants for years. It was a different time. And all those concepts reinterpreted to a modern audience just have inherent comedy because of how dated and bizarre they are, I think.
Even though obviously for the time it wasn't silly.
Oh,
well, do you think
at the time they were truly made for kids? You have to remember that.
Okay.
Comics are now an all ages affair, but these ones specifically, with these characters being created for them, were for a childlike audience. They were, back. Those are the only people that cared about Batman, and then generations of Batman fans grow up and hand off the love of Batman to others, and now we have a Batman for all ages, which is fantastic.
Yeah, we have an Alan Moore type of Batman now, and just would you say that was more '80s that kind of influenced that style?
Oh yes, because the '80s got grim. Watchmen happened in the '80s, right? And so that's when all comics kind of got a little bit more mature.
Watchmen.
That's when Speedy became a heroin junkie. That's when what was the other big social issues they did? But Green Lantern was famous for doing a bunch of comic books on race or race issues.
Is that when Jon Stewart came?
Yes, absolutely. And they diversified the cast quite a bit. And that's actually kind of around the time that the Suicide Squad comics started. And you could have comics about the government being corrupt and about a bunch of bad guys having these different motivations. John Ostrander, who started the series, his series, which if you guys have DC Infinite, the app, I'm not getting paid to say that, but they have all of them on there. You can read the whole thing. They're really interesting. Only because they weren't doing that in comics at the time. These were kind of more grounded espionage comics, but with fantastic supervillains. And they were pulling them from really weird eras. Bronze Tiger is a character that's very connected to the Suicide Squad early years that a lot of people thought Idris Elba was going to play. And the fact that he did means that character can come in later, which will be cool. Because reading some of these earlier ones, they've just hit the tip of the iceberg of like actual characters from Suicide Squad comics versus the ones they can pluck out of anywhere. And some of those dynamics and stories would be really interesting. So,
okay.
I mean, they got a franchise on their hands here because this concept really, I think that's why DC was smart to really kind of get this moving again, is this concept is like their Mission Impossible. Every couple of years you can make one of these, you can switch out members of the cast, but yet people and fans of it will always like it, right? And there won't be any of this signing one actor on for too many films business. There won't be any of this child actors outgrowing the role. Every movie can be different. Every movie can be completely swapped out.
Would you say that the tone could even be different, or should they stick with the James Gunn kind of like Kevin Feige kind of style? Like, they're not going to go too out of the grain. Maybe they are these days actually.
Yeah.
But would it be smart to? I mean, it might be.
I think it'd be too.
Yeah. I mean, but also if you did that, would it get, I don't know, boring?
Or it would become a parody of itself, right? And then at some point they would. It's almost I would combine it or. Make a connection to it like the James Bond franchise, right? At some point, James Bond got too tongue-in-cheek, the Roger Moore years, and it was still a spy movie.
I still love that Roger Moore.
Well, yeah, they're still great spy movies. They're still great action movies, but they're not as serious in tone as like what we've done with the Craigs or what Sean Connery started with. This might just go back and forth, and maybe David Ayers will be seen in a better light. Once you get like 2 and 3 and 4 of these, you'll probably see David Ayers' first one is just like, you know what? I see what he was doing a little bit more now. That we've played with the formula a bit. He really laid a lot of groundwork for just kind of getting these characters out there. Do you not remember that when this movie came out, the Harley Quinn look went nuts in the cosplay world?
I mean, funny enough, I was going to the comic cons at that time too.
Yeah.
That's when I was in the military, and I was going to 3 or 4 every year, and that was probably at least the number 1 to number 2 thing that you see all over the place.
A member of my family's wife, who was well over the age of 40, dressed up as Harley Quinn for Halloween that year. That's how much people loved that costume.
I mean, it did something. Obviously,
everybody loved that costume, but the way Harley was portrayed in that movie and the kind of the overall video game-ness of that first movie, I think is what makes it a little bit joyless. And they try to insert some stuff, some fun stuff into it. They try to get the fun songs in there. They try to get like these family moments. But it's such a mess from the get-go, you really lose interest.
Well, Enchantress is a really awful villain, first of all. And she's not...
It's weird.
And the thing is, I was excited because I think Enchantress is actually an interesting character, but I'm not a fan. I forget her name. But I don't. I mean, she was good in what? Paper Planes? Was that what it was? Was her name? I don't even remember her name.
I am completely blank.
But she also wasn't very good in that V movie.
Oh, Valerian?
Yeah, and
Well, that's its own thing. We should do that one on the show.
yeah.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Well, what we should do eventually too. I don't know if you're a fan. We saw I just do with someone. Fifth Element, which is the same director as V. Valerian.
Double feature.
There you go. That's right.
Yeah, but I know, in terms of like, would we have to keep the jokes in there? I think you have to, because the audience are going to expect it to be tongue-in-cheek. And you've heard about the Peacemaker TV show that they're doing.
Well, of course, the post-credit scene shows him alive, like, hey, we need you for some other stuff.
Which also makes me think that once you spin him out, your silliest character, maybe you don't need as many jokes in the next one. But as long as you have Harley Quinn in there, which you don't always have to, you always have some element of humor. But I don't know. I would like to see more. I'd like to see a really thrilling one that's more in line with like a Bourne movie or like a real tense thriller, right? You know, where you can still have some jokes in there, but it's not such a yuck fest like this one is. Not to say this one wasn't bad and the jokes land perfectly, but you know, sometimes you can make that violence have a little bit more gravity, and that would be its own movie.
And, you say Bourne Identity. The moment you said that, perfect imagery hit my head, and you could make a good spy movie, but with expendable type of characters that have over the top personalities, but still like
And a shark.
And that's one thing. Like if you and a shark, seriously, I still Sylvester Stallone is one of my heroes. First of all, so it was odd to see him take that role, but I mean it makes sense when you think about it. Like I said, they probably paid him a whole shitload of money. First of all,
I hope you enjoy your boats, Mr. Stallone.
yeah, and he says like I saw an interview with him. He says it took him like a day or something to do all of his lines, and then he went back and then probably got paid $5 million, $10 million, $20 million for it. So
I always love it
I'm sure he's fine.
When non-voice actor movie stars do voices, that's one of two stories. That's like, oh, I did my pajamas and I didn't have to like do it did from my house. Or the other one's like, I got really into the character. This was a really good opportunity for me to like really try it. And like voice acting is such a craft, and everybody just if you're famous already, you get to just do it.
Well, if you're Kevin Conroy or Mark Hamill, it's a craft. Sadly, and you see these people who are actually good voice actors. You see how they do their thing, and then you see someone like him come in there real quick and like, hey, did I do good? Like, yeah, you did.
Well, it's
thanks,
just like
man.
Vin Diesel being credited as Groot. You're like, blow me, Vin Diesel.
Yeah.
It
should be
name's on the poster.
Sean Gunn should be credited as, because he was one who was actually walking around the whole time.
That Sean Gunn loves to be in green suits, doesn't he? Because he was
Seriously.
Weasel, he's been Rocket.
Seriously, it's an older brother, younger brother. Like, you're gonna be that guy every single time. Like, oh, okay.
Well, it's like, why does Robert Downey Jr. have to do the stickers on his face, and I have to put the full suit on? Just put on the suit.
Seriously.
But some of the better parts of the movie, I guess some of the more questionable parts of the movie is the Ratcatcher 2 Dark Phoenix moment at the end, where all of a sudden she's controlling all of the rats in the entire thing.
Oh yeah.
I thought that was a little bit too. Her connection with the rats was a little too undefined for me to like understand. Why don't you just do that all the time? If you could command every rat in the city, why don't you just take over?
Why are you having problems right now? Yeah, I get what you're saying. And maybe it is because I think, and that's one thing. And I don't know her backstory, and maybe you do better than I do. But all I got was, you're kind of being penalized for nothing. Mm-hmm. It seems like you're the only person here who actually like from the get go. Her like, hey, I want to be everyone's friend. That's kind of her whole thing. And typically it's like that's kind of like a Harley Quinn, like, hey, how's it going, friends? But she might kill me later. But you can tell this girl like she genuinely cared for everyone. And,
yeah. Well, no, she is an original character. Ratcatcher 1 is not the one that not as portrayed as in the film. Well, Ratcatcher 1 is its own. Once again, a lot of these Batman of all the DC characters ends up with the weirdest villains to kind of pull from. So Ratcatcher from the comics was just a real gross, like sewer, ratty, like filthy character, right? Where in this one they kind of made both of them like this kind of Charles Dixonian father-daughter in poverty relationship. It was like Les Miserables, right?
Yeah,
where they just there's something very operatic and tragic about them, and
sure,
I think that's what he was going for in order to really endear her on and early. But she's completely original, and that's, I think, really smart. I don't understand why they keep making such a point to call her Cat Ratchet 1 and 2. I think that's just a bit of a running gag.
It's one thing, too. I loved how, and Marvel was really good at this, but the only people that were calling them by their superhero names were like the people. All like they were, hey Black Widow, can you throw me that fork? No, they're saying, they're not saying that at all. They're calling each other by each other's names, and we might never even hear the word Black Widow in all of the movies.
See, that peeves me. If I watch a Black Widow movie, I'm going, what? Black Widow? Black Widow. Oh, and
It's me.
Oh my God, yeah. See, this is where I differ. I'm a sucker for keep the mask on, call you by the superhero names. Like, I hate
Carl Urban and Judge Dredd.
Yep, and absolutely. Carl Urban, give him more work, please. He is wonderful.
Oh, he's great in Boys too.
Oh my God. Well, never mind. He does have. He's busy. He's fine.
Yeah.
I was just watching the Star Trek series the other day. I'm like, they totally misused Carl Urban in those Star Trek movies. He could have been such a better part.
Well, he was such a good Bones, and I don't know. I grew up. My dad, his favorite show of all time is Star Trek, and it's not like Next Generation, which that's probably yours and mine.
Absolutely.
I'm just gonna say it like I'll say it to all you guys. Next Generation is way better than the original. Yes, the original is technically always better, but Next Generation was that, and then had layers added onto it.
And I was just about to say, put Carl Urban. Carl Urban definitely could be in a Suicide Squad movie. I'm trying to wonder who I'd want him to be.
I mean, he, like I said,
Let's cast Carl Urban in the Suicide Squad.
And it would fit his mold perfectly, and I'm sure he's probably worked with those directors before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, think about it. Like, this opens doors for a lot of people to get some fun work. But
Thor, he was in Thor Ragnarok.
I know, and I was just realizing how fun he is in that one too.
Yeah. So, and that's Taika, and Taika's one of the guys we're talking about.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So, Carl Urban, if you're watching, just give us a line. You want to come hang out? Have some Cheeto Puffs? Come upstairs in a bowl. But going back to kind of the overall arc of the movie, and was there any surprises to you, or did you kind of like feel like, I don't know, I feel like James Gunn in the previews always kind of self-spoil. Like the fact that Starro was shown in like the first trailer, I kind of wish they had held that back. Because the minute I saw the tentacle and the minute it's a star, I don't know if, I guess, do you know who Starro the Conqueror is, or was that your first experience?
I knew who he was, but when I saw it, I mean, I'm not as familiar with the DC world as I am with the Marvel world. Like I said, the only DC I was reading was some Batman and then Gail Simone's Wonder Woman. Yeah. Other than that, I was doing Spider-Man and X-Men and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, the Starro in the comics in this one with the face hugging and group mind capacity, I kind of hope he comes back in some way, because in a different director, a different film, that's a very terrifying villain and a very scary concept. It's always been my opinion that would have been a perfect villain for a Justice League film.
Oh yeah.
Because that's it's just the stakes of a mind controlling villain like that could just like take over an entire city would be so cool. And so I hope he's not. This isn't the last time we see a Starro.
And one thing about it too, it could have been like first of all, he was very like pink, and obviously he was very like this could have been really bad, but. The good thing about it is they made him so intimidating, like H.R. Geiger's Alien or like The Thing. I felt like the consequences were real, like to not want to mess with him because he was, first of all, anything that takes over you without your permission. That's very as a human just thinking about it. Like I said, in Alien, whenever they're laying the eggs without their permission, and the Thing they're assimilating into that person without their
absolutely.
It's like rape with, and it's a very disgusting when you think of the imagery. It's just very disturbing, and there's no better way. And for some reason, Starro actually was like, it made me feel like that. Like, oh, you're actually like, you're not just like putting a little like thing in the back of their head. And they're like, hey, do what I do. No, you're actually like
taking them.
Yes.
So, but then at the same time, going back to you made a really good point. I could have seen him scarier. I thought the color of him was a little bit too. What's going? They're trying to go for, and this like alienness of him is whatever. Make him a very vibrant color if you want. But I think scarier would have been. But then also he's in broad daylight. That's probably what they did that. If it was a more nighttime fight scene. Probably would have gotten away with it being a little bit more, probably darker.
Do the little Godzilla kind of thing where you're half of them you can't see, half of them you can. I get what you're saying.
But it's also very rare that you get a finale of a film in broad daylight like this, where you can see every little thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the better parts of it, but also one of the weaker parts of it, because then it becomes just a big animation fest at the end with the rats and everything.
And I will say,
it didn't need that big of a CG finale for how it was going.
You're probably right, and it's one of those things. I'm a fan. I'm not usually a fan of like, oh, we need to take down the big monster. I'm usually a fan of we need to take down our equals over there. Like our 10 bad guys need to kill those 10 bad guys. I like those kind of stories because I think there's maybe just a little more human, like emotional things going on. Like the whole thing that happened with Rick Flag and name
Peacemaker.
It was, and it's funny because I'm not necessarily a fan of Joel Kinnan, whatever his name is, but I wasn't even a fan necessarily of his first go around with the Suicide Squad. But the second time around, like you said a minute ago, when they were trying to break out Harley Quinn and whatnot, and you see this certain kind of dynamic that's very charming. It's like, well, you guys are all cute, and like we're trying to do like Polka Dot said, I'm a superhero. There's something cute about what you guys are all doing, and there's it's all something very silly and goofy, and it's just the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, they just can't exist in a society that they didn't create, man.
Yeah.
And of course, any good story about outcasts and underdogs, I'm going to be a big fan of. But that's where this plays it up, is that it shows the outcasts as pure of heart, because at least they are who they are, versus these societies that are just kind of everybody else in it for themselves,
Yeah.
And that's how you get away with a villain movie or a villain-centric movie. Unfortunately, is you paint the world as it is, which is the true villain. Reality is the villain.
Yeah, well, sadly, the villain was America kind of in this movie too.
And some of that, there's just some of that fatalist,
Sorry,
like nihilist culture or zeitgeist in here. But that's what makes it. It's also part of the cartoonishness of it. It's like you're not invested in this world. This world. It's like it's not the real world.
Well, yeah,
versus David Ayers was
right.
too. That was real.
It was bleak, and and don't get me wrong, I do like his world. And what's funny is, like you said earlier, they had to fluff up his movie because they thought that what was it, Guardians 2? Something else just came out that was kind of very light and happy. Maybe it was Guardians, Thor Ragnarok, and I remember they're like, "Hey guys, that's the new thing." So they kind of like made it all like they said they put a soundtrack in there, and they made all the characters like, "Hey!" But I am curious to see the 20 minutes longer of Joker and seeing maybe the greatness, and maybe it might be more like watching Michael Keaton's version than it would be like watching Joel Schumacher's version at that point. Who knows?
Right? Like it definitely could. Editing is everything, as we just saw with the Zack Snyder Justice League movie. When you edit it the way you want it to, it's a very different story. It's a very different
Look at the Justice League cut. Look what that did to change people's minds. That movie went from like being like a 6.8 to being like an 8.5. Just from we didn't just necessarily add more scenes. We took all the bull crap scenes that weren't supposed to be in the first place, and then we added a lot of complex scenes that made all the characters have much more definition. And then whenever the big old finale did happen at the ending, you all cared.
Well, and that's a really good comparison to draw is, as we talked about earlier, as we were having some delicious barbecue, Zack Snyder complained that he needed the 4.5 hours or whatever because he just couldn't possibly introduce these characters with any less time, right? We need more time to spend and introduce these characters. Bitch, James Gunn went through like 15 in 90 minutes, and I feel like I know all of those characters better than...
Yeah, they were all fleshed out.
Than the Flash you introduced and the Aquaman you introduced. We find about Aquaman in his own goddamn movie. He is nothing in that first movie.
But good look at.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I'll say this. All of these movies are going heavy into Beefcake Town. If anything about these comic book movies, we're just getting these larger, prettier men to just
Henry Cavill.
around.
I mean, if you want to be pretty as Superman, you want to be pretty as The Witcher. I don't care. Just
call me. Just call me.
Yeah, seriously.
Well, and this is like kind of. I really happy that John Cena's having his The Rock moment where he's just kind of understanding the real depth of what his charisma is. Right? It's not that John Cena can't. We don't want to see John Cena in these roles. We love John Cena no matter what role he's in, like The Rock did. I have a theory on why these WWF stars become such good, like, all-around movie stars.
Going back to, like, Hulk Hogan and such. I mean, it's going to go back for 40, 50 years.
Yeah, these men entertain in live. Have you ever been to a wrestling show?
I've been to 3 in my life. Yeah, they're awesome.
They're the energy and they're family oriented, but it's entertainment for all, right? And it's in front of your face. Yep. And so these wrestlers from that career really get a good sense of just how to entertain.
Sure.
And how to play up things and
play
how to downplay
the heel
things.
And play the hero. Yeah, absolutely.
And not every time does it translate to screen so perfectly. I think John Cena was talking about how he's happy he's making movies like this because he tried to do just the straight action movies where he was just like basically strong.
The Marine, I remember, was a prime example, yeah.
And those weren't successful because he wasn't doing anything different in those movies. But in these movies he's having more fun in, or movies like this where he's both very physically I mean, this is a grueling role. Peacemaker does all of the wrestling in this movie.
Oh yeah.
But he's also doing so much of the, the line work and the good timing, and that comes from truly doing it in front of a live audience. Like, we need to recognize wrestling as more theater than it is, because
And
he
it
has
is.
the timing
It is
and the
theater. It's not
understanding.
only theater, but it's like you're literally like. And the funny thing is, they still, obviously it's still very, they hurt themselves all the time because I mean when you see it, but yeah, they're dancing with each other,
Oh, yeah.
they're acting with each other, and it's beautiful. It really is.
Dave Bautista was the other example of that. Another gun find.
Oh man,
Yeah.
and it's funny because I've seen him in certain movies where, and it's him, John Cena, The Rock. Not so much Hulk Hogan. We all like Hulk Hogan, but I never really felt the same charm, like especially from The Rock. I mean, that's how The Rock is. Like, I think a lot of people would vote for him right now if he want to become president of the United States. I think that's how much people like The Rock.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's always interesting that guys, when you're like, so you go back to this scene where he's in his tighty whities, and you realize just how large of a man John Cena
he's
is.
a big dude,
Like,
yeah.
that guy's a refrigerator-sized man. You start to think
seriously though,
just huge.
good for him and his wife.
You start to think about like a body type like that and a person like that. They always end up having to play cops. They always have to play like special forces people in those action roles. I think it's fun when they can be in a role like this, where I mean, his costume really works, even though it's the most ridiculous thing.
Well, his first of all, his mask is ridiculous because it prevents his sight. And it's kind of like, well, why would you wear that? But it is. If you see all the interviews, he's wearing it all to everything. Like, why are you wearing that? And like you said, he's doing the Rock thing right now. He is owning it because he's like, oh, this is my role. This is who I am. And,
He knows what he's got here.
and if you watch him in any like comedy, he is really funny too. He, like I said, sometimes I can tell he's acting. He's a big old stronger version of Marky Mark. And sadly,
Don't tell Marky Mark
well, I guess he hates being called Marky Mark now. And I'm not gonna like. Could you imagine? Like, he looks at me and says, "Hey, what's up, Marky Mark?"
Next time I run into him at Burger King, I'm gonna call him Marky Mark.
He would never be at Burger King because he has his own burger place. Do you know that? Do you know that?
I'm sure. Well, I'm sure it sucks. He probably secretly eats that.
They call it the Wall Burgers, I think it's called.
That's dumb. You're making that up.
I could look it up. Yeah, no, it's his brother. His brother is a professional cook, and they have like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 restaurants within the country.
Oh, good for you. I hope it works out for you, Mark.
Yeah,
Son of a bitch. Like, he needs more money.
I know, seriously. And something about him, he's not even that great of an actor. Sometimes he is.
Well, they all have their ups and downs. I mean,
The Fighter was really good.
Hey, Marky Mark's been in Transformers. He'll probably end up in a Marvel movie or a DC. I feel like both DC and Marvel are just flipping coins for the last remaining bankable talents. With
Don't put Steven Seagal on there ever.
he's not on the list.
He better not.
But like, between anything that's coming from like any good British TV show or good Netflix show, they get snagged up into one of these movies pretty quick. And then any movie star that's kind of like aged right out of, I want to do my own stunts and I don't mind being on a green screen. They're in there. But we'll see who happens next. I wonder where they go with this next.
Yeah, I'm excited, and if they get, I hope that they can keep the momentum going. Like we said, if they don't have James Gunn because James Gunn can't just keep doing the same thing. He has to go up. He has to do something different. Like, he has to do like Ridley Scott did from Alien to James Cameron did in Aliens. Like, you don't have to keep it exactly the same, but keep it in the same universe, same feeling, but maybe change the tone. But regardless, finally, DC, the last few movies they've done has been a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, I'm really curious because, Guardians 3 isn't his next big thing. He's going straight from one to the other. What's going to be influenced by this into that or vice versa? Like,
Besides some of the actors that for sure will be in it anyways.
yeah, and good for him. If he can straddle both sides, and over at Marvel he has to play nice because Disney won't ever give him an R rating, and over at DC they're like, you can show more genitals if you want to.
I know, that's one thing I love about DC is it's more adult themed usually.
Which is an interesting track. I think this has been one of my big beefs with the DC movies is, was it the Batman games, the Arkham Asylum games, and Injustice games all had that tone, that really dark DC tone.
Arkham Asylum is arguably the best game of all time.
Yeah. And there's a reason to kind of take that aesthetic into live action because it really, I think fans really enjoyed that realism of the DC universe through those games. But in translating those into those movies, and all of the movies, right? Like not taking a break or moving it around, but all of these movies are very grim and gritty. I don't want them to always be this way.
Yeah, my dad says the same thing. He says, I love watching these, but we can't only do dark. We need to do corny a little bit here and there too. And And even though I get what's going on, because Superman, for example, is not necessarily a dark tale.
No,
and he's
but
not
people
very
love to twist it around that
exactly.
way.
And don't like I liked Christopher Nolan's. I say Christopher Nolan. It was his too, though. Zack Snyder and Christopher Nolan's version of Man of Steel. For the most part, there were some things I did not like about it, but I did like how they showed a little bit more of the backstory on his people. But there still kind of goes like they're trying to show maybe more of a complex character, but I don't really see the complexities that they were trying to put out, I guess. But I don't know. I always found Superman to be almost one dimensional, but it's hard to maybe make something 3-dimensional of him.
Well, I don't know if you've been reading around, but the big news, or not the big news, but another factoid.
Tell me that's big news.
I spend a lot of time on the internet. I don't want to brag, but I'm on Yahoo News like daily. But James Gunn, of course, was talking about the movie, and apparently one of the first drafts, what he wanted to do was they would go up against a brainwashed Superman. And that would have been like the starro of the movie.
Is that why they had that little comment that he made about Bloodsport almost killing him?
Well, that is literally Bloodsport's origin, and that's a wonderful story. It's I think from the early '90s, the Dan Jurgens era. Lex Luthor hires Bloodsport, who is like basically the Kraven the Hunter of the DC universe, like the ultimate marksman.
I'm not a fan of Kraven the Hunter, by the way.
Well, and I also think it's really lame when a villain's superpower is I never miss. Which, of course, is dumb because that's like Hawkeye's superpower in Green Lantern.
Yeah, it's one of the characters in Umbrella Academy, too. And even though I like the show a lot and I like his character, I've never liked that idea.
And let's take our penises off the table. Your superpower is guns. You just want it. You want your superpower to be I'm really good at guns. And have that be like a really cool thing.
You're Hawkeye and I'm Green Lantern. Yeah. Which one's cooler?
But if you said that, but if your power was I have a lot of guns, people are like, well, I have a lot of guns. It's like, okay, well, I'm really good with them. Oh, you're a superhero. Yeah. Oh, we're an assassin.
Well, I got a panic room in case you come and try to take my guns.
Oh my God! If we had a Coloradan superhero, he would just his superpower would be his arsenal.
And I respect that.
I'm terrified if we have like a real life Batman come to Denver because he's going to be packing a lot of heat.
Oh yeah, I don't think that'd be crazy. Oh man.
But anyway, so that was Bloodsport's origin. If you want to run it down, Bloodsport totally on point, and that's he shot Superman with a kryptonite bullet. He's been around back and forth, never did too much too interesting. We talked about Ratcatcher. King Shark came from Superboy. Polka Dot Man's from Silver Age Batman, and then Rick Flag just in general is kind of an interesting thing if you ever want to go back to the old Golden Age because he comes from like old war comics.
So he actually is like well,
this is Rick Flag Jr.
Save the day kind of guy.
Yeah, he comes from the days of like Sergeant Rock and the Howling Commandos, where just like war comics those were their own heroes, and so he was kind of one of the first Silver Age regenerational characters to kind of come back, so kind of kickstarted the whole thing. But yeah, he's just kind of your prototypical super soldier, Captain America type.
Okay. Which, by the way, I think this is supposed to be in the Boys season 3. Jensen Ackles will be playing a character kind of like that, but like a weird version of it. And I'm excited to see because, what's it, Eric Krumke, the guy who has been doing The Boys, did the first whatever seasons of Supernatural. And so I'm excited to see a radar superhero version of what he could bring to the table.
That poor man has suffered on Supernatural for so long. Like, I feel like it was a prison sentence for him.
Well, he went to hell like 15 times.
I know. Oh, Supernatural is just like Charmed, where it's like I would read the description of the episode, like, oh my God, fighting demons, portal, let's do it. And then you turn it on and they're just walking around. When does shit happen?
When shit did happen, though, with Supernatural, it was on point. They had moments of like being the best show on, but then they had too many fillers, and that was the problem with Smallville too. Smallville, if they would have just like had like the first 1 or 2 episodes, and then the last 1 or 2 episodes, and then just had those, and then just had like 10 seasons of that, it would have been the best show of all time too.
Well, it goes down to one of my thoughts, and I'm really curious to see what DC does here, because obviously Marvel this last year did this experiment that's paying off quite wisely of you can do the movies and you can do the TV shows, and the TV shows don't bring down the quality of the movies or the stars in them. And if anything, the shows get you a chance to just keep all of your fan base consistently satisfied throughout the year in between big movies. I have no idea how any of this makes money. Did Suicide Squad make money? Was it a big hit?
I mean, I know it was praised by people. I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
That these days with how much money did it?
With streaming, everything works. I don't really know. I don't understand how the whole game works anymore.
Nobody does, and that's actually what I'm curious about. is Disney, of course, has all the money in the world, so they have an ability to make that gamble. With this Peacemaker show coming up with HBO Max, you can definitely tell that's DC's version of what they're going to try to do. I would argue that DC would be way better off just doing miniseries on HBO Max, the home of Game of Thrones, and like movies or shows that were already kind of known to be cinematic.
Well, like shows like Sopranos and whatnot are already like movie quality shows. Yeah, do that, but with
stop locking yourself into these big old spectacles where you have to try to please everybody in a theater of nobody.
Good point. You're already doing a good job with your own stuff.
Yeah, because I would say the best Superman movie I've seen lately is the WB Superman and Lois. But I just hate the fact that it's on the WB because that means that it's... I guess that's the WB. How old am I? The CW.
I say, yeah, they have the WB for a minute now.
The WB. I'm not 16 years old anymore. But they, if that show could actually like have effects instead of having to pad itself, the concept, the tone, the right people, and just like the whole feeling of that show is right on point.
Yeah.
So go watch other things. Suicide Squad and a WB show are going to be very different in tone. So, but by the way, why did you choose your reverse Flash shirt for the podcast today?
I felt like even though he is not an actual, I mean, maybe he is in some comics. But,
I don't know if he has been.
I would assume that since he's too important of a villain, they would never allow him to be in that. But then again, Harley Quinn's pretty important. But was she always important though? Probably not, huh?
Well, and that's a good one. Is Harley Quinn only joined the Suicide Squad in like a version that came out 4 or 5 years ago? She really is a modern ad.
Isn't that crazy? She's not really even technically part of the history of it, and yet she's maybe the most celebrated part of it.
She's definitely a little bit of a lightning jolt in there. They always had like the one Supermanic character. Other versions had like maybe the Mad Hatter. The Joker's never been in it.
I want to see the Mad Hatter. Yeah. That would be fun to see. And Arkham Asylum, another thing. You get a fight Mad Hatter, and I love that stuff.
Yeah. If anybody's looking for further reading, this is the book I was telling you about the other day. Gail Simone did a couple runs of that book called The Secret Six, which you could argue is kind of like a twist on the Suicide formula because it's all about bad guys. They're not in prison. They're not doing it for the military. But it is a villain-focused group of 6 characters who go on espionage missions for money. Deadshot is a big character in that book.
Okay.
And then they have Mad Hatter actually comes into that book. They have a bunch of great zany characters coming through. So if you like Suicide Squad, I would say this is like the jelly to your peanut butter there. And then I don't know if you are a fan of the DC animated films they put out.
Every once in a while, whenever I hear a good word, like I haven't watched the part 1 and part 2 of the new Batman one, but I've heard good things about it. Was it the long? No.
Halloween? The Long Halloween, yeah.
Long Halloween, yep.
We're going to talk about that one. Okay. But go back to the back catalog. They made a Batman Assault on Arkham short, which is basically a Suicide Squad movie, and then Suicide Squad Hell to Pay, which are both very fun.
Okay, I'll check those out too.
Because once again, you have Harley Quinn in those, and they have a whole bunch of new different characters. It's animated. It's very violent, very adult. It just kind of shows you that this concept of villain on villain action is really appealing. Yeah. And there's endless possibilities with it. So
and I think the biggest drawback is the fact that you're making us care about these characters too. Is because at first you're thinking, okay, cool, I get to see a lot of bad guys that I don't care about get blown up and kill a lot of people themselves. But then you find out, oh no, if it has good writing, then I guess you can make you care about a plumber. It's just it's funny how you can do whatever it takes. But I thought at the end of the day, Andy, to close everything up, I would say that Suicide Squad, even though I liked the tone it was going for the first one, I felt like they were trying too hard to stay away from all the other material of what was already going on previously, especially with Joker. They were trying something completely new. That's why they did that completely new thing. But sadly, most of the things did not work. But with the Suicide Squad, the new one, I think most of the same kind of gimmicks that did work in the first one worked in this one, and then all the James Gunn charm also worked. I would say that it went from like a 6.5 to an 8.5 in terms of what I rate it.
Which character did you not want to die?
So I think the one that probably would have hurt the most for me to see die would have probably been Ratcatcher too. I think, cause like I said, she showed the most humanity out of everyone. Even Polka Dot Man, which I love the character, I love the actor from other movies. He was actually in Dark Knight in small parts in that too, which is funny. And he was in Ant-Man, so he's been a lot of voices.
He's a wonderful character.
A lot of voice actor too. I mean, he's great.
Triple threat.
Yeah.
Which character are you happy died? My answer is Pete Davidson because I hate that guy.
You know, I did hate Pete Davidson, and I probably still hate him because I've seen his comedy, and I don't like his rants about his dad. Even though I feel bad for him, but he uses that stuff to, I guess, like make himself feel better. But
Yeah.
I saw The King of Staten Island with him, and it was done by him and Judd Apatow. And anything Judd Apatow does, I find he finds out a way to put humanity in everything, except Amy Schumer. I don't. She's not. I don't like her.
And that's another John Cena connection. What if Trainwreck is what happened to Peacemaker before he went to jail?
That's what happened.
That's what happened.
What a train wreck that was.
Which means, and Big Davidson's King of Staten Island is what happens before he becomes Blackguard.
And then that's when he rats on every. Yep.
Wow.
You're welcome, everyone.
So if you're doing a movie marathon, you just added a whole bunch more hours to your day.
Yep.
Yeah, I've always dragged on this guy, Jai Courtney, who played Captain Boomerang.
Mm-hmm.
But over the years, especially when he was in one of the iterations of Wet Hot American Summer, he's very much one of these kind of funnier dudes he's an Australian action star, and he basically got a couple shots at Hollywood where they just wanted a pretty face, and he flunked. So now he does other stuff.
All those opportunities he flunked, like the what do you call it? The one with the
he was
Shailene Woodley.
Divergent.
The
And
Divergent was
Terminator.
garbage. Terminator was garbage, and the Die Hard 5 was garbage.
Yeah. Too many. Great agent, whoever represents Jai Courtney. You got him. Yeah, good job.
Yeah, he probably that's probably his wife right there. He married that person.
What I will say is that over the years I've seen him do some funny stuff. And then I saw him show up in the beginning of this one looking fucking disgusting. I was like, I kind of want to see Jai do a little something here. I want to see where you go with this. And then he dies too fast.
I was thinking the same thing, and of course he dies like a G.
Yeah.
With it was his hand or his foot was still like thumbs up or whatever. I forget what it was doing.
Yeah.
And it is funny because like in the first one I did not care about his character. In this, for the moment he was in it, I cared deeply about his character, and it just shows. Like you said, James Gunn's power in the 90-minute movie, where I don't know how he does it, but he can have someone like. Maybe not Pete Davidson, that's not a good example, but someone else that's in a movie for only 45 seconds and you're already bummed that person died.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and also they were just interesting. I think the more colorful cast was that first cast, and then the rest gets a little
Nathan
bit
Fillion's character was ridiculous, and I found out
he's real.
And of course, we love Nathan Fillion, but because you see him, because I remember his arms were getting shot, and he was like dying, and I remember thinking, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And of course, the only reason why he was in the movie is because. Nathan Fillion and James Gunn are buddies from like Slither days.
Absolutely, it's a very much a buddy movie. Even with Michael Rooker as Savant in the first 5 minutes.
Michael Rooker's always, and Nathan Fillion was one of the big old bad guys in prison in the first Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yep.
I mean, of course, James Gunn's going to keep on using these people, and
let's be friends with him. I want to be hanging out in these movies.
Well, I mean, like
whenever
all those allegations came out about how he was saying those dumb things on Twitter throughout the years, and then. Every single person, especially Dave Bautista, was like, hey, James Gunn is such a good guy that if you keep on pushing this shit, I'm not going to be part of this movie either.
What a wonderful thing to have happen to you in terms of the support he received. Because it was like, he must really be a cool dude.
I mean, and you're not getting that kind of thing from Harvey Weinstein.
No, you are not. The only thing you're going to get is a salty mouth. Anywho, kids, don't go to a party with Harvey Weinstein. You can't anymore. That's like Quaaludes. You're not going to be able to do cool stuff anymore. Generation Z.
Oh man.
The Detachable Kid is actually a derivative. I found this out of a character called Arms Fall Off Boy, which was a Legion of Superheroes, aka the futuristic team's reject. So once again, James Gunn goes real deep for these polls. He goes really far for a joke,
to the point where they don't even like. Have the character.
Yeah, and Nathan Fillion looking good. Nice pipe.
He did look. Hey, I know that you're playing a really ridiculous role, but you look young and there. I mean, because when you see him in The Rookie, that TV show, he kind of was thick, and it's like, oh, you're starting to see your age, buddy. You're starting, but then now you look good in that. But yeah,
I only know him as Castle.
I know him as sexy.
He's been on TV forever.
I know. Firefly.
Yeah,
Firefly is one of the best shows. The 2 seasons.
Yeah. I'll get around to it.
All right, buddy. Well, if there's not anything else you want to talk about.
Spay and neuter your pets. Hug and love your mothers and fathers. Always be kind to elderly. And yeah, this movie's a lot of fun. I would say what I'm being surprised by is who likes it. Because a lot of people, I'm like, you like that movie? They're like, I love that movie. I'm like, okay, this movie's a real crowd pleaser. So, if anything, it's fun, and we haven't had fun movies like this in a while. So,
I completely concur. I had a great time watching it, and regardless of it being like the best movie or not being the best movie, it entertained me the whole time, made me
Absolutely.
crack up, and I would recommend it to anyone.
yeah. And thank you for having me on here in the studio.
In the studio, yeah. In my basement.
The Batcave. There is a whole like giant penny and a dinosaur over here from one of his previous cases. It's quite impressive. But love you, buddy. Thank you for having me on.
Love you too, my friend. Thank you. Take care, guys.
The Nerd Frenzy Podcast.